Very much, and thanks for inviting me. It's good to come to events like this because actually the interchange and discussion is quite important. It's always good for when you're running a representative body to actually sort of meet the punters and find out what's actually happening as opposed to what you think is happening, and they're not always the same thing. Big Society has been somewhat in the news of late, and you probably saw the relaunch of Big Society on Monday. Now, are you all the wiser? Well, I'm certainly not. And it's not surprising, you know, I've been collecting quotes about Big Society, you know, for enlightenment. And I particularly liked Francis Maud talking to the New Yorker magazine back in October. And he said, this will be very messy. This will be quite anarchic. This will not be neat. And how right he was. And actually, rather more chillingly, he went on to say, you have to accept that there will be things that don't go right, and you can't do anything about it, because we are saying, we're not responsible for that anymore, you are. And I think that that goes to the heart of this debate. Because many aspects of Big Society, I think, are good and play to the strengths and the interests of our sector. But I think many people also have a worry that this is an agenda that is not funded and is perhaps anti-state. That's an issue that we need to explore. And it's not helped, I think, by people who surround, some of the groupies around Big Society, I call them groupies. There's a chap called Steve Moore who runs the Big Society Network, and he blogs. I don't recommend them. But obviously I have to keep an eye on this. And he did a recent blog talking about, you know, what Big Society is about. And he said, the heroes are the people. People doing things differently, giving, contributing and sharing, because doing so is delightful, fulfilling, and goes with the grain of their life. Now, when I read that, I sort of thought of, you know, the 20,000 volunteers for the Samaritans, the people who volunteer in hospices, and do they think that volunteering is delightful? I doubt it. They don't do that because it's delightful, they do it because of their commitment. And I think some of the stuff that's happened around Big Society just doesn't sort of resonate with the people who actually work at the heart of Big Society, which is our organisations. And my problem is that we as a sector, and I still like to call it the third sector, have been sidelined. I don't think we have been properly involved in this project. And now, when we face the sort of cuts that many of you, I suspect, in this room are facing, I find it difficult to see how you can build a bigger society when the capacity in communities, in organisations, is being damaged. Now, in ACEVO, we reckon that over this year, the sector as a whole will face a £1 billion funding gap. Now, £1 billion is a huge sum of money, but we think that over the spending review period, that will rise to between £3 billion and £4 billion. It's extremely difficult to predict, but we know that those figures are, you know, probably fairly accurate, being borne out by other commentators. And although I think, and I'm going to go on to talk about the opportunities, although I think there are real opportunities for us, as someone once said, you know, there is no long term without a short term. And if in the short term our organisation's capacity is being severely cut, with organisations going out of business, then how are we supposed to deliver some of what is behind the idea of a big society giving more power to citizens and communities? I think that there are certainly a strand of people who support the big society who think of it as sort of an individual responsibility thing, and who actually are rather antithetical to the sort of the collective, the community idea. think that's why they tend to either sideline our sector or think our sector's a problem because we're gobby, because we protest, because we say what we don't like and what we do like. And I think that's a problem for them. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom today. I want to talk about what I think are the opportunities in this agenda. And I think those are, there are three. I mean, the first opportunity is around public service reform. Now, there's no doubt that this particular government has picked up a strand of thinking that we've seen in the last 10 years under Blair and then Brown, which is for more diversity in the provision of public services. The idea that what matters is what is delivered rather than who's delivering it. And this is something that plays very, very strongly to our strengths as organisations. Because I think it's right. I think the history of our sector has been around delivering services that are much closer to citizens and communities. You've only got to think of mental health charities. A lot of mental health charities have come about because of the dissatisfaction that people had at the way the state dealt with mental health and a determination actually to do it differently and offered to deliver those services themselves. It's exactly the same in many disability charities. The charities around autism, for example, the state has been very, very bad at that delivery. And organisations in our sector have said, actually, it's not good enough, and we're going to do it better. And there's been a huge growth in areas like children and youth services, in adult social care, in mental health and disability, and that's good. I think that's good. And I think that in the opening up of public services, there are great opportunities for us to deliver more. So, on Monday, the Prime Minister was writing in the Daily Telegraph about how he wants open public services and diversity. So he's very clear that he wants to drive that agenda forward, and that plays to our strengths. I think there are dangers there, of course, and how we compete with the private sector is an issue. But I think it's an opportunity. The second opportunity allied to that is that the government are opening up the commissioning and procurement arrangements. They are really looking hard at how services are commissioned. There's some interesting things that are happening that you may or may not have noticed. Unless you're a sort of geek around procurement, you probably won't. But a couple of weeks ago, they launched a new portal which actually has all the government tenders on it. Local government is following suit. So there's actually going to be much more information around tenders for public services. And they've done two interesting things, which, well, we'll see how it goes. But they're going to have a mystery shopper approach. So they want people to be testing out the tendering and commissioning arrangements and telling them their experiences. I think that's quite interesting. And I think mystery shopping is something that plays very well to our strengths, as long as they listen to what we're telling them. And they're also going to be launching surgeries where they're going to be inviting people from SMEs or from the sector to come forward with their ideas about more innovative approaches to public service delivery. Again, I think that's quite an interesting idea. We'll see how that goes. But I think it's there really for us to take advantage of, to test it, and to challenge them around those ideas. I was at the launch of this event, and I was actually quite struck because although the room was absolutely full of SMEs, i.e. the private sector, and I was the only person from the third sector there, when Cameron was talking, every time he talked about SMEs, he said SMEs, charities and social enterprises. So he must have talked about us like 10 times or so. That was quite interesting because he clearly does see the role that we can play. And his article in the Telegraph, again, was very strong on the role that we can play.